Hello there. This is Frenchie, aka Frenchie Manette, and you are listening to the Frenchie Talks about Star Wars philosophy with my fellow Canadian, Mr. Ross Arsenault. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on, Frenchie.
Thanks for accepting. Last time you were on Northern Constellations, we did a rookie profile on you, and I really liked what I heard your presence on Star Wars. You seem to really love it, but not just the fantasy aspect. You seem to really digest all the aspects. So something clicked in my head saying, "Hey, I need this guy on the show." So let's dive right into it. First of all, obviously you watched Star Wars for the first time. It's awesome. It's a sci-fi epic. What did you realize? And what did you realize you really delved deeper than just a sci-fi aspect?
Oh, that's a good question. It was really something that I guess kind of sprung a lot of my creativity as a child. I wasn't someone who necessarily had a whole lot of broad interests. I had a few kind of key passions, and Star Wars was definitely one of those. And so it definitely kind of molded a lot of the creativity that I did, whether it was painting a broomstick and kind of playing with those in the yard and fighting the neighbors, or just the general kind of things that you would think about. I guess when it came to kind of understanding it on a bit deeper of a level, I would say when Disney purchased Star Wars, it really kind of reanimated the entire fandom. And so that created a whole kind of new element of people who really kind of explored different philosophies and people who chatted more about different sides of Star Wars. And so it got me thinking, and it got me to go back and reanalyze the movies and watch them in kind of a new light. And that was really eye-opening. And then, of course, as new films and projects have progressed, they've kind of created new dots, and the speculation of it all creates for different ways in which you can see, okay, well, how does the philosophy compare? And George Lucas's words behind the scenes, and how you can kind of take interpretation from those, and what was meant before, and how you can translate that in your head as, okay, other people have to now interpret George Lucas's philosophy and reproduce that. And how have other people learned how to understand that and reproduce it? And how can I learn to understand that and understand Star Wars better consequently?
Yeah, true. And for me, it got a lot later in life. I always thought as a space opera, an epic, which it is by its own right. But it's really when I start watching documentaries and realizing the influences it was based on, the samurai stories. Also, when I started thinking, because I was raised in religion very deeply, and I never, for some odd reason, connected, but it's a very spiritual journey. The messages is very spiritual. The Force itself is very spiritual. And then I start connecting the dots, right? Then I start realizing that this story, yes, is about the Skywalker saga and the fight of good and evil, but also in a deeper level is really what we always been questioning ourselves, like this Force. We don't really know what life is. We don't really understand our purpose in life until something happens, right? And same thing for this. The Force, you can't see it, you can't touch it, but it's there. It influences everything around us. It's a life force. And that message has been, around for a very long time in different religions, different philosophies, different spiritualities. It's always some sort of life force. So he's a genius. Lucas is a genius to really take all those elements and creating a world that it still resonates to today's day and age. And my daughter, she's 7 months old. God knows she's going to be introduced to Star Wars pretty early on, and I hope it has an impact on her, right? So it's something that's ever going to grow. And compared to, let's say, an Alien and Predator, it's super fun. Sci-fi flicks, horror, action, but that's what it is, right? It's very one level. Prometheus and everything try to push it, but it's very one level. Star Wars, it's a whole beast on its own.
And that's true. I mean, Star Wars is the fantasy and the myth and the fable, less so than the kind of apocalyptic view that science fiction usually tends to take. And so that's what's great about Star Wars, is it takes this positive outlook and this very optimistic look on life and lens in which you can approach just everyday problems. And yes, there is this life force, this binding force that kind of unites the galaxy together. And there's the living force, and then there's the cosmic force, and kind of all of the different elements that come together, whether it's fate and destiny or life and death. But there's also the one major factor that I think George Lucas, and I think this is one thing that Star Wars has done a really good job of still making sure is a fundamental core theme, and that is choice. And you have Anakin making these wrong choices, and you have Rey making these great choices, and you have all slew of other characters who are making varying choices that are good and bad, and then some that are changing their mind midway through, like Din Djarin, who realizes he's reaching for the gear shift knob and it's not there because Grogu unscrewed it and was playing with it, and he realizes the sin that he's willing to commit, and it goes and it takes it to that whole other level of where is that line for you, and what is that all-encompassing power. For Din, it's his creed and his this is the way. It's not the Force necessarily, but the Force plays the exact same role for the Jedi in kind of guiding their philosophies and guiding a lot of the galactic decision-making for these major characters, because not just the Jedi believe in the Force. And that's hugely examined in Rogue One, which is a very, very spiritual and hope and faith-based film in a lot of good ways, in a lot of very positive ways.
Yeah, it's what you said, positivity. Yes, there's a lot of positive, but also, again, it's a mix of a lot of things. You said like spirituality, but there's also reflections of World War II. Like we can't deny it, right? We cannot deny
Star Wars.
Yes, and the whole dichotomy of the rebellion versus, the empire. The empire, you can't get more clear than, the Nazis type of thing, right? But there's other lore around it. But that's one thing I realized even before I realized the spirituality was the historical cognizance of the movie, what it was searching and driving its force from. But it's interesting, he was able to it could have been so easy to just go on the war aspect, just go onto the historical aspect and just make a war movie, because hell, it's in the name, right? But he pushed it more past the war and really, there's a lot more to war than just men pointing directions and destroy, right? It's what drives them to go into war. It's what, kind of like in their brain engraves in the hate, that pure cynicism of like just wanting to control everything. And really, it talks to the dark side of a lot of people that, we see it on the internet. A lot of people, have a nice face, right? But then you see the real sides of people when they go online and start bashing other people and what they permit themselves. A lot of people have that dark side, and it's something that was a lot more easy permitted back in the day, because the UN didn't exist, and there's a lot less world control, so people kind of did what they wanted, and dictators popped up. But it's interesting points he made, right? That yes, it's war, but there's always something behind the war.
Yeah, it's the morality of all these things, and it's really quite apparent. I watched Phantom Menace the other day, and there was a couple names. I was curious to know, like, okay, like Newt Gunray is Newt Gingrich. It's very clear. Lot Dodd is it's like maybe it might be Thomas Lott or something. But anyway, like all of the Nemoidians and all of the bureaucrats are directly linked to, like, Palpatine is Richard Nixon and Adolf Hitler. It depends. It depends on the time period that he's in, but those are the two characters that he's based off of. And so there's also a lot of Dick Cheney you can see in the prequels that kind of associates with Palpatine. And so, not to get necessarily political, but Star Wars is fundamentally political, and that is built in within its philosophies as well. And then you have the U.S. also. Star Wars is so big in the U.S. and I mean, I love our American friends across the border, but I think sometimes it's not necessarily understood that in Return of the Jedi, the Americans are the Empire. The Ewoks are the Viet Cong, and that's something that people don't always realize. And even still, you look at some of the word choices of certain political parties that are even quite modern today. Trent Lott, perfect, thank you. So yeah, they all are really quite linked, and so it's interesting to see how these kind of fundamentals continue on no matter the war, because it's still tales of morality and these decisions that people have to make on a daily basis. And you go back to the First Order with Hux doing his extremely Nazi-esque speech, and the pretty much direct Heil Hitler salute that they do,
Yeah.
it shows that if you don't know your history, you're doomed to repeat it. And then you have a lot of great notions when you mix that with Kylo's killing of the past and not wanting to go down those roads because he sees the mistakes that Luke has made, and Luke can agree with him on those same mistakes. And so it really is quite interesting the way that the political side of things and the philosophy is consistent across the board, but it really it makes you analyze. And let's face it, war and politics are so fundamentally linked together. It's Star Wars. It makes sense for those two to be so linked throughout the entire saga. And when it's done subtly, it's really great. And sometimes, and the prequels, it's done a little too over your head. But I really love the politics in the prequels as well.
Yeah, it's one thing I didn't really like when I was younger was the politics aspect, but something I appreciated more I got older, because I actually grew to understand more politics when I got older too. Politics when I was younger was just freaking boring. Now it's like, okay, well, this will determine the future of my daughter. This will determine the future of a lot of things, is the policies to put in place. So I start paying attention. And for me, I'm glad that you mentioned the new trilogy, because a lot of people bash on it. Even I, when I saw the last one, I was like, I give up. Like, what the hell's going on? But more I revisit it, more I realize there's the messages, the like you said, doomed to repeat itself, right? A lot of people say, oh, they rehashed A New Hope. Yes, but there's a reason. Like you said, even though that the rebels kind of won, they didn't win. And it kind of in a more subtle way, in real life, the Nazis, a lot of them escaped to South America. A lot of them escaped in the US and impregnated their thoughts, their philosophies to the KKK, to the,
to NASA.
That I did not know. What the hell do you mean by that, NASA?
There have been in as well. There were a lot of top German scientists who were essentially plucked by all of the top nations around the world. A lot of them had to go to trial and they suffered horrible fates, but a lot of them didn't. A lot of them were able to get away with their skills of buying them freedom in a lot of ways. And then it creates a whole other morality tale there. And that's what's really interesting about the Star Wars when it comes to that other side of things. And yes, you are doomed to kind of repeat things. And yeah, there were issues I had with the sequel trilogy as well, maybe not following some of the same consistencies of the other trilogies. But I think a lot of the themes, even in Rise of Skywalker, are great themes. It's just not necessarily sewn together in a great package. And just because I like maybe the stitching of the prequels more than I like the stitching of the sequels, that's because I grew up with that stitching a little bit differently. And so we all know that the stitching is the strongest from the original trilogy. And it was stylistically a little bit different for the prequels and the sequels, but that's just because things change over time. And that kind of needs to be taken into consideration. I think a lot of the politics sucks in the prequels because the Neimoidians are Neimoidians. I think that it makes way more sense when they're not these giant racist gray blobs that don't make any sense. Like they're awful in their execution. And that's something that there's some sloppy, poor direction, acting, chemistry, and poorly aged decision-making things that don't necessarily work with prequels. You look at the sequels, the acting is bonkers good in the sequels. And so it can kind of look over the fact that if you look at some of Rey's lines, they're like, man, that's a bad line. It was delivered really well, so you're not even going to notice it. Whereas you can see Natalie Portman, you're a great actress, but that was a bad line and you couldn't do it. And that's okay, because it doesn't really matter on changing the overall themes and philosophies of all Star Wars. And so if you can look past that, it allows you to maybe see things that you didn't see before. And that's another great thing about Star Wars, is being able to see those layers, even if maybe you've been blinded by some of the other things, whether it's the really cool, flashy lightsaber fights, which is a great thing to be blinded by, or sometimes it's your frustrations, which we all can kind of get in our own way on. But if you're able to have your opinions, but then still be able to appreciate the things that you like and be able to critically interact with the rest of what you've been presented with, then you should be allowed to have those criticisms. And then that's just part of being a fan. And that's nothing anybody can be mad about.
Now, one thing I want to touch upon is the success Star Wars had in presenting relationships. For me, this is the perfect example of different types of relationships. You got the Obi-Wan and Luke Skywalker relationship. They're like the father he never had. That he always, something made sense when he got presented and started learning for him. Then you have the dichotomy of the father you never wanted, right? The being presented a story and being manipulated and being hid from the truth instead of actually being told the truth because the truth is so horrible, happens in real life. Sometimes, like, but better not knowing the reality of certain, things of your past that you don't have any control than actually facing it, right? But Luke has to face it. He's forced to face it. And you also have the amazing relationship of Obi-Wan and Anakin, where it's a bromance, right? I think we all been through that kind of relationship that you've been in it for years. You are friends to the end until that one unstoppable thing that really breaks and cuts it in half, and you would have never guessed, but destroys your relationship completely. It even becomes your enemy, right? So it really speaks to the force of human nature, human need to grow with someone and be friends, but how that can turn like that in an instant, and there's nothing you can do.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good way of putting it, because it comes down to, once again, decision making on the part of Anakin, and then Obi-Wan playing such a key role. I know we're talking philosophy, but in psychology, there's an interesting kind of thought process of everyone is four things. They're always at some point in one shape or form, and you have to try and find the right balance of these four things. You are four different characters. You're the hero, the villain, the victim, and the guide. And in order for you to be the guide, you have to have experienced hardship, and you have to have experienced situations. The hero is when you are going through hardship. The victim is when you are allowing yourself, and that doesn't necessarily mean a bad thing. You can be being a victim is sometimes just you're the victim. Don't blame the victim sort of situation. But sometimes we can allow ourselves to be the victims, and sometimes that in doing so makes us also the villain, and also the away moves that we make, the decisions that we make to go against what we fundamentally maybe want, but allow us to get our short-term goals. Anakin's decisions to chop Mace Windu's hand off because he can't take those extra steps in his mind to risk the potential thought of Palpatine being dead, because what that means for potentially saving Padme. And so if you think about it in that way, you have Obi-Wan, who is said guide, and then you can look at someone like Luke's journey, and they can play all of those roles. And that's what allows us to put ourselves in these characters' shoes so nicely. Yeah. And so when we have Obi-Wan and Anakin having this bromance, it allows us to be in one of their shoes. And it allows us to kind of understand where they're coming from. Even if we don't understand where they're coming from, we can still find the argument. And that's what makes a compelling character, whether it's villain or hero, is being able to see themselves as the hero, the villain, the guide, and the victim. And being able to be those four things, Star Wars knocks that out of the park with all of its main characters. And that's what's really, really nice to see. And when you have the Obi-Wan series coming around the corner, that gets me really excited, because you can get a whole nother side of Obi-Wan being the victim of, is he going to feel sorry for himself? Does he fully believe Anakin is dead at this point? Not yet. We don't believe, because Obi-Wan once thought as you did. And then there's the notion that we know that they're going to have some form of interaction, whether it's spiritual or physical. This is going to be kind of a duel for the ages. And so I'm really excited to see what that can mean for exploring more character philosophy as well for that relationship too.
And going back to what you said before, like decisions and, choosing your path, there's especially one moment in Star Wars, which is in the prequels, is when Anakin is faced with the fact that his mom got captured by the Sand People, and, who are torturing her and almost, on the brink of death. That moment, that letting himself go and finally deciding to do the wrong thing, because he knows he should just take and leave. But he seeks revenge. He dwells in revenge, and he decides to act on it. If he wouldn't have done that decision, I don't think he would have become Darth Vader. That is probably for me. There were seeds put in by Palpatine to grow into that, but he still had a decision to make and actually act on it, and that's the pivotal moment. And same thing for everyone. Sometimes just seeds that can be planted in us of people influencing us. That's what thoughts are, right? That's why some people become a certain way, because there's a lingering thought that keeps growing and growing and growing after years, but they stay in the subconscious until you make a decision to act on what's been seeded. And for me, that's an interesting concept. It's the same thing for Anakin. He's like anyone else. It just grew until an event catapulted him.
Did you watch Gallery with for The Mandalorian season 1?
Here and there with a 7-month-old baby. It's kind of, I hope I can watch something until both of us fall asleep.
No, that makes complete sense. But it was an interesting point because Dave Filoni really broke down how important it was that had Qui-Gon survived, it fundamentally would have meant that Anakin would have not turned to the dark side. Qui-Gon would have played the father role that Anakin needed, and the duel of his fate was what was on the line. And by Qui-Gon dying, that seals Anakin's fate for the rest of his life. And Maul succeeds in doing what Palpatine needs him to do in that regard. And it's interesting because Qui-Gon says to Anakin, don't. When he's ready about to slaughter the Sand People, Qui-Gon reaches out through the Force and speaks to Anakin, and Anakin doesn't listen. And it's been kind of highlighted before, but the prequels, and Yoda speaks about it, that the 3 movies really highlight Anakin's fall to Darth Vader. Fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, hate leads to suffering. He's said to be afraid in The Phantom Menace. They say it a bunch of times about 9-year-old Anakin, you're afraid. And he is afraid. He's afraid to leave his mom. And then it leads to all of this anger that he has about having to have left his mom, and about being powerful and about being held back, and then about his mom dying. And then it leads to all the hate that builds up, and the additional fear and the additional anger. And then it's just suffering for the rest of his life after he kills, or thinks he kills, Padme, and ultimately is responsible for her death. And so I think that's another beautiful piece of poetry that George Lucas puts in the prequels that is often overlooked, and the importance that it plays in the moments that were chosen for Anakin. I do agree that maybe it makes more sense for Anakin to be older in The Phantom Menace than he was. Maybe make him 13. That makes a massive difference in potentially getting more people on board with liking that movie, and you can still make it maybe a little bit more believable how incredibly skilled he is as a pilot and as a mechanic. And also the weird relationship with Padme. So there's a handful of things that could work there as well. Maybe get a little bit more of the Clone Wars and Attack of the Clones. But George wanted to pick these key pivotal moments in Anakin's life to show how much he could turn, how like these big changing moments. And then a lot of people just saw that as, oh, he's got, multiple personality disorder, or he's bipolar, or, oh, he doesn't make any sense. He has this disease, and like, oh, he's a completely inconsistent character. No, he was just highlighting these key points, and it was important for us to watch those in being able to see how Darth Vader could become that villainous dark figure.
And ASG, by the way, thank you. Like always, follow our shows. Mr. ASG, he says, I always wondered if Palpatine was able to save Padme, if he would ever turn back to the light side. And that's true. That's one thing I've never understood from the prequels, is that the whole thing that, he went to the dark side to be able to save Padme, but it ended out, actually doing the contrary. In my mind, if someone would promise me, turn to the dark side, you can save her, and then it, because I go to the dark side, I actually kill her or think I kill her, I would probably just try to kill Palpatine. Why did he continue with Palpatine in your mind, even though like he kind of lied to him?
He beat him. That was very much it. It was he realizes too late that it's gone. He's lost, and that moment that he's becoming Frankenstein's monster, on the table and realizing, and he pulls things, no, she was alive. That's the moment where it's like, where he's really piecing a lot of these things together, and he's realizing that he's maybe not Palpatine's best friend. He maybe isn't the son he never had. And over the next 19 years, or I should say, really the next like 22 years, until about Empire Strikes Back, he's more and more and more growing to realize how much Palpatine treats him like shit, and how he is the bane of his existence, and that everything that's gone wrong in his life was because of Palpatine. But also, Vader's afraid of Palpatine, because Vader burnt half of himself alive, and he isn't as strong as Palpatine. He had all the capability of being as strong as Palpatine, but he wears a suit that debilitates his strength. When you look at the design of General Grievous is a better design than Darth Vader in terms of practicality of movement. When you consider what that mechanical design provided by Palpatine could have done for someone like Darth Vader, it's no contest. Darth Vader could have been significantly more powerful, but Palpatine wanted him to be his lapdog, and he needed him to keep him at bay. And so that's why he kept him in this like giant leash of a suit.
But one thing I have to say, I do understand, like, practicality wise, but there's something I've read, that Darth Vader's suit was made on purpose for him to be constantly in pain, to drive his anger, because he was never comfortable. And when you're not in comfort, and that's one thing, one person I had really back in the day when I was an audio podcast, is someone that is a Navy SEALs instructor. They are trained to never be comfortable, to never be at ease, to never settle your mind, to be always on alert and always something wrong here, right? Because this is where you're most proficient, and you do less mistakes, when you never think everything's going to be okay, when you're always in the back of your head, something's off. And that's the same thing with Darth Vader. He can never rest. He can never have a peace, except for his meditation chamber, right? That's the only moments you can probably have just a neutral. So yes, in practicality, it might not be as good, but I think this is why he's so dangerous, is because he's never comfortable.
Yeah, that's definitely true, and that's definitely feeding into his ability to tap into the dark side and become strong. I mean, there's no denying Darth Vader's incredibly strong. It's just a matter of the strength to be able to overthrow Palpatine and what he would do. Darth Vader doesn't want to rule the galaxy. He doesn't have the same political agenda. He's lost a lot of his political ideals. He's just trying to tap further and further into the dark side and figure things out. And we see into the comics now that he's learning more and more. Like he continues to investigate what could have been done to save Padme, and what could have been done to potentially have brought her back, and why what still could be done to bring her back, and why Palpatine was in part, and if not entirely, to blame for her death. And so, yes, it is done to keep him in tune and focused and strong, but at the same time, not strong enough. And so when Lords of the Sith is a really great read, and it gets a great insight into Darth Vader's mind just post Revenge of the Sith, and piecing together a lot of his kind of understanding of the puppetry that Palpatine has done. But Palpatine, the flashiness, the speed, Revenge of the Sith doesn't do a good enough job of representing. Well, frankly, according to George Lucas, none of the films do a good enough job representing Palpatine and his strength. It's just it couldn't be done on film to make him move as fast as they needed to when he's spinning up and spiraling from his Senate. It's supposed to be almost invisible. And when you look at the concept art for Palpatine originally, there was so much struggle because they didn't even want him to be human, and that's why he looks like he's a weird monkey thing. And in the original cut of Empire, he doesn't look anything like Ian McDiarmid. And it's a woman who does the voice, I think, even, or it's a woman's face with a monkey superimposed over top of it and something else. But they really wanted him to be otherworldly, to emphasize just how strong and how much black magic was involved with this character, and that Darth Vader, it was an uphill battle that he couldn't do because he didn't have his strength anymore, in the sense of he didn't have the strength that Vader needed. Because as much as Vader was a Darksider and he was tapping into his hate to be strong and powerful, probably the only thing that could have ever actually given him, and we see it in the end, the only thing that ever could have given him the strength to overthrow Palpatine is love. And it was in the end his love for his son, not the love that he lost with Padme, which is what for the longest time he believes is the only thing he could ever cling to. And then he finds out he has a son and it changes his mind. And that's why you see such hesitation in Vader in Return of the Jedi, even before he makes that final decision to pick up Palpatine and throw him down the shaft.
And same thing echoes into the new trilogy. The last one, same thing for Palpatine. That's his undoing, is the love of two people. I'm still not sure if it's a romantic or you can say there's been contradictory comments of it's more of like a love as friends, and then you got love as love, but it's still love that again defeated Palpatine and his arrogance and his egotistical self that kind of blinds him every time. He thinks he's gonna have
overconfidence.
Overconfidence. Now we would be dismissive if we don't talk about two characters. Again, we were talking about Palpatine, but before we continue with him, I want to talk about one of the most underrated, but I love the book. I really was interested in him in Rogue One because he did him perfectly, is Tarkin. Tarkin is probably the only person that could talk down to Darth Vader and not be choked.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. Tarkin is such an interesting character, and the way that Peter Cushing commands the screen and having someone like him, choosing him to kind of present this hostile administrator, this Dr. Frankenstein to Frankenstein's monster, sort of, even though he wasn't that character, but that's kind of the role he played in A New Hope. And it's essential to have these characters in your myths and fables. So I think, Tarkin is an awesome character, and I loved his use in Rogue One, and I loved his even the digital representation. I think is the best, maybe the best in Star Wars. No, the flashback in Rise of Skywalker is the best in Star Wars.
I still think personally that Tarkin was probably best, a lot better than Leia. That's for sure. Good Lord.
Leia in Rogue One is bad looking, and they're like, I don't know the legal side of deepfakes, but however the legal side of deepfakes work, Disney needs to get on that and redo that 1 second or that 2 second scene, because it's so much better if you deep fake it. And would be really, really easy to do.
But again, new technology, you learn. But at least with Tarkin, they did it well. But as a psychological sense for Tarkin, he has no tap to the Force. He doesn't wield the lightsaber. But what he wields is his sheer strength of will. And it's funny because when you read the book, you kind of realize he comes from a very hard background, a hunter's background, right? He comes from a background that is kill or be killed almost, right?
Yep. King of the Hill.
But what drives him to be, and I'm personally, to be that evil? Because to be like that and to make decisions to blow up a planet and not blink a goddamn beat, you got to be dark inside. What drives him to be dark inside like that?
Tarkin's an interesting character. It really comes from his poor understanding of strength. He might be. I didn't even really think of this, but when you look at that book, the book Tarkin, it does show a lot about toxic masculinity and about this just toxic desire to be the king of your domain and strong, but in a way that is not compassion, is strength purely in its most brutal form. And I think that it's such an archaic, but at the same time similar to Mandalorian view of war and order, that he is so structured in his view on those things that it's easy for me to understand how someone like Tarkin in his position could do something so deeply horrific and terrible. because he's so indoctrinated in his system. He is such a believer of the Empire and that what they're doing is orderly and right, and that the rebels are terrorists. And I mean, fundamentally, you can say the rebels are terrorists, even though they are the heroes. There are terrorists to that political regime, and he is a firm believer. As much as it seems deeply disturbing, I think we've seen enough of that in the world of people who have been so focused in believing that their political allegiance is more important than humanity, and that following a specific order is significantly more important than considering the magnitude of the actions themselves. And so it's gross that Tarkin is a more understandable character nowadays than maybe before, but I think he is. I think his kind of sadistic view of order is one that is still pretty common, unfortunately.
And it's funny because for me, they're opposite of spectrum. Tarkin is not about control. He's about, like you said, control of self and the things around him, but he doesn't want to dominate everything. But he is faithful to a T. He is blind faith in its purest form, right? That, if it matches to what he thinks should be, the Empire and those terrorists, let's get rid of them. He's going to do anything, and he has no remorse. If he does, he doesn't show it very well. But then you get the opposite, which is Emperor Palpatine, where his control is literally dominating everything, and being the sole force that has a say. Now, is there something that maybe most people wouldn't think about his psychology or his reasoning or his motives that you maybe would have realized what's behind Palpatine?
Palpatine's an interesting one in that regard because he's kind of the definition of just pure evil. We don't really know a whole lot about what motivates him to be so awful. And I think if this weren't Star Wars, that would make him a bad character. But this is Star Wars, and he is the space devil. And that means his role is slightly different, I think, than... I think we can kind of view his achievements, especially his achievements in The Rise of Skywalker, as conquering the Sith and conquering the dark side to a degree, in the sense of he's able to live forever to the extent that the dark side can allow it. In the sense of you live forever if you're a Force ghost. Ta-da! Light goes off in your head, Palpatine. If you were just a good person, you were strong enough to live forever. But his obsession with clinging to life shows a little bit about kind of where his priorities lie, his ability to become kind of one with the dark side to a degree also allows us to kind of view him as more than just a person who would have those same kind of fundamental flaws or compulsions that can make us the way that they are. However, I also believe that one day we will get a Palpatine series or a Palpatine mini, like some exploration, and he could just be the world's biggest incel. He could be just someone who is politically motivated. In the Darth Plagueis book, he's a bit of the shafted black sheep. He views himself as the smartest one in his family. And although he's kind of the ostracized one, and it doesn't really make a ton of sense as to why he's so evil, but it works just because of who the character is. The Acolyte, which is coming out, I think there's maybe a slim chance because his mother was basically not a character in Darth Plagueis, and his father was such a minor character that I'm going to guess that I have just a bit of a hunch that it wouldn't shock me if there was a bit of a retcon and that they did a very strong mother-son relationship with Palpatine and his mother, and that the Acolyte could indeed be about maybe her relationship with Darth Plagueis, and then could end in Plagueis killing her and then taking her son or something along those lines. But it wouldn't surprise me if we're going to find out more about why he's so evil, because we really don't have a good reason.
We know, but at the same time, for me, like he took it to a whole different level, and I think he knows he's evil. But he's trying to always push the limits, understand more of the force, right? As a
Mhm.
a doctor back in the day, they did a lot of legal stuff. They to understand medicine and human bodies, they used to do things that really fringe into evil,
Yep.
really fringe into things that are taboo, like ransacking, cemeteries and taking bodies and even doing things to normal humans are alive, right? Doing shock therapy, dissecting brains while people are alive, just for the better understanding of what they have, right? That fringes on evil. And the same thing for me, for Palpatine, that he is motivated by the fact that he doesn't understand it all, and he won't be accomplished until he understands it all, which all is the force, right? And for me, that's the pure motivation. He is evil, he knows he's evil, but it's for a purpose, because he doesn't feel accomplished.
Yeah, he wants to live forever. And I think that goes down to, he is the mad scientist. Like you said,
Mm-hmm.
he is trying to understand everything. He's trying to conquer everything. And I think that's really plays a strong role as to why you see this arrogant show off in the prequels, but this cloaked recluse in the original trilogy. He's tired and bored of being the flashy dictator with the colorful robes. He doesn't need to be that anymore. He's conquered the Republic. He's conquered this galaxy. He needs to conquer something far more important and far more interesting for him at this point in his career. And that's why he's kind of, do your thing. I'm focused on this Skywalker kid now and figuring out how I can make all these clones. And so all these backup plans and contingencies. So the only thing that's ever going to the only thing that can kill me is if these little Skywalker son of guns somehow get in my way. But even if they do, I'll have a backup plan for that, because in the end, all I want is one of these Skywalkers to just kill me in hate. That's all I need, is for one of these Skywalkers to kill me in anger, and then I get their body, and then I can just continue living on forever. And so that was the new way that they introduced it in Rise of Skywalker, which it doesn't contradict anything from before. I think it makes it viewed in a bit of a different light, but it's not something I'm against. And I think it makes that moment where Vader protects Palpatine in Return of the Jedi, although he's really protecting Luke, even more obvious that he's protecting Luke. Whereas if Luke does strike Palpatine right down in anger, as Palpatine goads him to do, then boom. What we learn in Rise of Skywalker means that Luke has given in, and that Palpatine would infect him like a disease right then and there.
See, and this is something I never realized, but that was his main plan, right? To transfer into Luke, and again, there's always standing in his way. But it's kind of funny if you think about it. This whole thought about transferring oneself to always live, and and manipulating the scenes as a puppet. It's kind of what we're more and more realizing in today's day and age. The 1% population in this world, right? You hear a lot of research being done into mapping your own brain to be able to transfer your consciousness into AI, to be able to live forever in some shape, way, or form. But there's always this purpose of always living, but then being in the shadows and controlling the society as we know it, right? So that kind of resonates with me, like that. It's innate in a lot of people that willing to do anything possible to always move on and evolve into what is naturally possible, and break that natural limit.
I love that you brought that up, because that directly reminds me of my favorite quote in Star Wars. And I think it fundamentally goes back down into light and dark, the ability to let go, legacy, the obsession with oneself and vanity. But the line being the one that Yoda, I guess the greatest teacher failure is, but no, we are what they grow beyond. And that is the true burden of all masters. And so the true way to live forever is in the legacy that you impart on others. You must pass on what you have learned. That is how you actually live forever. And that's how you not only live forever, but you live forever and get stronger, because they are what, like, they grow beyond what we are. And that is such an important part of teaching and being the guide for someone else, and what Luke is able to do for Rey, and what Palpatine can just not do. He cannot figure that out. But ultimately, he passes on so much to Anakin and to Vader, but Vader doesn't give in to those things. And so it's a really important part in Star Wars, one that I really think is such a fundamental part about that master-apprentice relationship, and one that is accomplished so well by Yoda in particular. I love that conversation with him and Luke in Last Jedi.
And where it's also kind of like, I do agree, like the whole passing on, where the Jedi does it, right? They pass on, they have Padawans, but it's also kind of why they had a downfall, because it got passed on like generation to generation, but there was their own kind of arrogance of like, we're untouchable, right? Because we have such a strong force, and we can always pass it on to someone else. That's what blindsided them. The one person with an apprentice against a whole army of Jedis, and they fell to one person's will. So that is a strength, but also can become a weakness because it can blind you.
And that was the thing. They knew that they were blind too, but they were afraid to share that information. And they were rightfully afraid to share that information, but that was because they had embedded themselves so far into the Republic system. And I've been a little slow on my High Republic reading, but I've been thoroughly enjoying Light of the Jedi. I'm not quite done it yet, but it's been really great to kind of see the Jedi in their highest of positions. And we can kind of see some of the writing on the wall as to how they're going to slowly trickle into the prequel era Jedi, and how they're so easily going to get caught up in those kind of mistakes. They have this broad view, but that broad view can sometimes, if we don't constantly evaluate it, it can sometimes lead down the dark path. Because like you said, it can keep a view very narrow-minded, because Anakin, in this case, he outgrew Obi-Wan. Full stop. He outgrows Obi-Wan and needs a different teacher very, very quickly. He needs Qui-Gon. He needs a non-turn to the dark side Count Dooku. He needs Yoda full time or something. He needs someone who is able to adapt with him because of his power and the stagnancy that he feels. He gets into a position where the Jedi are complacent and he isn't, and his urgency for action results in grave error.
Yeah, and something that to have effects on for generations in the world of Star Wars. That being said, look, we're gonna have to wrap it up. But thank you so much, Mr. Arsenault, for your amazing view on Star Wars, and just, you love Star Wars. It shows you love Star Wars when you talk about it. You radiate, my friend. So I cannot wait to have you back. Definitely gonna have you back when the new series are, because especially Acolytes. I cannot wait for Acolytes. I can't wait to see a Sith perspective, and maybe further our discussion on philosophy of Star Wars. But yeah, that being said, where can people find you, my man?
You can find me essentially anywhere where you can find your podcast. We're currently switching over to Anchor so that we can be accessible on all the streams. But Recorder 66 podcast, Recorder 66. So that's just essentially where you can find me. I'm not too big into the socials, so just would love to be able to engage in Star Wars conversation with you. And so we just have a weekly podcast there, and so I can be found wherever you find your podcasts.
All right, and you can find me on North Schmoes on Twitter, also Schmoes of the North on YouTube, on Facebook. We got a group, we got a page. So do not forget to follow, like, notifications. And in less than 10 minutes, you can find me on stereo. If you do not know what it is, download it. It's amazing. It is podcast meets radio meets, you can send your questions in via audio, and we can have an interaction. And my episode, I'm going to continue the Star Wars talk. I am talking about Star Wars and Schmoedown with a double-time Dragon Con winner, Mr. Thomas Harper. So jump on in stereo in 10 minutes. I'll be waiting for you. So that being said, thank you very much, Mr. Arsenault. Again, thank you for everyone that's been sticking from beginning to end of this episode of the Frenchie Talks About. Until next time, bonsoir.